He called me street garbage across a chandelier-lit table, so I hit send on the files that would crack his dynasty by midnight. If stories like this hit home, tap like and subscribe to Not So Perfect Family 365 so you don't miss what happens next. At 7:30, the cafe turned into a small, civilized storm. Briefcases, damp coats, hiss of steam. I moved by muscle memory. He arrived like always. Black coffee, 1 sugar. He tipped like it was a secret and took the window seat with the cracked sill. New roast, I said. Chocolate if you're hopeful, ash if you're not. A careful smile, let's be hopeful. His eyes found my name tag, Maya. His suit didn't brag, his watch didn't either. He opened a slate gray laptop and disappeared behind it, then reappeared when the line thinned and I carried over water I pretended someone ordered. You must really like our burnt water, I said. Atmosphere, he said. And the service. I blushed against policy. You from the neighborhood. Newish, work brings me downtown. I like starting where people still say please. What do you do when you're not testing our patience? Something with numbers. A not answer that closed like a door. He kept coming. He learned my nights belonged to a UX class where I sketched tiny floor plans for strangers' choices and a side gig fact-checking for local newsroom. He learned student loans, my mother's pill organizer, rent. He never offered rescue, he asked more questions. Liv, my best friend from the salon, breezed in with bobby pins between her teeth. Who's the polite weather system at the window? Just a regular, I said. Optimist on Tuesdays. Date the good guy, not the wallet, she said. He asked me out the way some people ask for the truth. Tiny Italian place, too much basil, come with me. After class, I said and felt briefly upgraded. Dinner was easy. He listened like silence could hold too. I talked about buttons strangers want to press, he said. That's more power than a CEO half the time. We split tiramisu and the check. On the walk back he said, as if it were new information, I'm Evan. We both smiled at the cup I'd been writing for weeks. He waited, then added, Evan, just Evan. Red flag, my brain murmured. Days braided into weeks. Mom texted photos of the cat. My professor circled empathy on a wireframe. I paid the electric bill, barely. He started walking me to the subway when class ran late. Strangers don't scare me, I told him. Fair, he said. The second dinner he ordered a wine I couldn't pronounce. To Tuesdays, he said. To Tuesdays, I said. Outside under a forgiving street lamp, I asked the question I'd been dodging. Your last name? A soft laugh, then a pause. Calder, he said. Evan Calder. It meant nothing to me. Calder like the artist. Like the family, he said. He kissed me goodnight, careful and sure. Upstairs. I fed the cat, toed off my shoes, and opened my laptop with reverence. I typed, Calder Holdings. Headlines, annual reports, gala photos, a business magazine cover, a square jaw under a colder smile. CEO, Grant Calder. In one frame, a younger profile looked familiar. My stomach did the quietest, loudest thing, stalled, then ran. I scrolled, ports, logistics, a philanthropic wing, a map of acquisitions. I remembered the not answer about numbers, the hat joke, the way he tipped quietly. Liv's text lit my phone, you still up? Also, tell me you got his last name correctly this time, spell it. I typed it back. 3 dots, then nothing. In the window, my reflection wore the same borrowed confidence I put on before class. I thought of Mom's pill sorter, due dates, the UX assignment in another tab. I clicked a ribbon-cutting video. Evan stood a step behind the man with the cold smile. I closed the tab, then reopened it. Curiosity is a door. Down the hall, a radiator clanked. A faucet cried through pipe. I stared at his name until it stopped being letters and started feeling like a door I'd already stepped through. The air held. The invitation arrived the way expensive things do, heavy paper, serif type, embossed crest that left my thumb dusted with gold. Aliner and Henry Calder request the honor. It was not a dinner. It was a ceremony with forks. Evan handed it to me after class, his scarf still smelling like cold air. It's family, my grandparents' 62nd. 62, I said, that's not even a milestone, that's endurance. They built the company, he said. They're the only reason any of us behave at all. Will they want me there? I tried to make it a joke. It landed like a question. Evan tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, easy, practiced. They'll love you. And if they don't, I'll do a card trick until they clap. At the salon, Liv slid the invitation from my bag like contraband. Girl, this envelope pays my rent. She squinted. Black tie. Black tie means you need a dress with opinions. Opinions are expensive, I said. She thought a second, then snapped. Cousin Kiana's wedding, the emerald silk, it's hanging at my place. You'll look like money that remembers where it came from. I protested on autopilot. I can't take your. You can and you will, she said, already texting. Also pearls, fake but persuasive. We spent Saturday turning my apartment into a runway. Russ kissed my collarbone and fell like a decision. See, Liv said, pinning the hem. Wealth who? Wealth everybody, I said, staring at the mirror. I looked like a version of me that never overdrafted. Etiquette, Liv announced. Bread plate on the left, glasses on the right, smile like you understand opera. I don't. Then smile like you're polite about not understanding opera. At night, I watched a stranger on YouTube teach me which spoon speaks first. In my notes next to fish fork, I wrote, "Don't spill." In my head next to don't spill, I filed the electric bill. Evan called between meetings. My mother asked what you do. I told her you design how people move through screens. Did she approve of screens? She approves of anything framed in mahogany, he said. She's particular, don't take it personally. That word hung up there, blinking, don't. On Thursday, while Liv trimmed bangs and lectured a teenager about heat protectant, her boyfriend Rafe leaned against the counter and dapped his reflection. He was all charm and unpaid tickets. "What's with the castle letter?" he asked, chin at my tote. "A family thing," Liv said crisp. "Whose family?" Rafe grinned at me. "Yours now, look at you, princess." "Knock it off," Liv said softer. She shot me a look, "I'm sorry." "It's just a dinner," I said like reciting. "People eat. People leave." Rafe's grin leaned into a smirk. Calder, huh, big boys, careful they don't chew. Friday night, I practiced walking my hallway in heels while my downstairs neighbor's TV did another crime. My mom called to ask if I needed her prayer list. "Always," I said. "Your grandmother used to say there's two kinds of rich," Mom said. "The kind that's loud and the kind that's quiet. You be the kind that's yourself." "I don't think that's one of the kinds," I said, smiling. "It is now." The day found me. Evan arrived not in his usual dented sedan, but in an unbothered black car with a driver in a coat the price of a semester. He looked at me and forgot the world for a second. "Okay," he said. "Okay." I laughed because the alternative was to cry. The driver held the door, leather swallowed us. Downtown slid into neighborhoods that seemed to exhale money through hedges. The city thinned into a lane canopied by trees. "You good?" Evan asked, squeezing my hand. "Define good," I said. "On a scale from I know my salad fork to I speak hedge fund." "We're going to dinner," he said. "That's all." "Your mother is particular," I reminded him. "My grandparents aren't." "And your father?" I tried to make it light. The question had sharp edges. He looked out the window. "He respects results. He's not great at entrances." Which was when we turned into a drive that had opinions about entrances. The house rose from the lawn like a memory no one had earned, stone and windows and a front door as tall as a story. People moved the way staff moves, invisibly and all at once. Somewhere a string quartet practiced the art of not being noticed. The car stopped. The driver opened my door. Cold air licked the space between me and the dress. Evan stepped out first and reached back for me. "This is just dinner," he said again, quiet, mostly to himself. I took his hand. My heel found the gravel, my breath found my ribs. The foyer glowed like a cathedral wearing perfume. Conversations hummed and then paused, a fraction as if someone had skipped a track. A woman with museum hair and a smile like polite weather approached on polished air. "Evan," she said, kissing his cheek twice without touching him. Her eyes slid to me, catalogued, priced. "And you must be." "Mother," Evan said, his hand steady at my back. "This is Maya Hart." Her smile widened by half a degree. "Welcome," she said. "What a memorable color." Somewhere deeper in the house, laughter broke like glass and then stopped. A man's voice, low, decisive, carried through wood and money as if both were air. "Is that her?" he asked, and whoever he asked did not answer. A woman in black silk read names off a leather folio and escorted people as if seating were a blood type. When she found mine, her smile held. "MS. Hart, you're just here." She pulled a chair and revealed my view. The head of the table where Alina and Henry sat like a photograph you keep for courage, and directly across from me, Grant Calder. Up close, his eyes were the cold kind of blue that remembers numbers, not names. Marina glided in 2 seats down, bracelets chiming like a soft warning. Evan's hand brushed the back of my chair before he took the place at my right. "Breathe," he whispered, and I did because he asked. Crystal chimed. Servers poured wine with wrists that never shook. Conversation opened on safe topics for rich people, whether as it relates to vineyards, skiing as a moral imperative, a gallery show where frames cost more than cars. Alina leaned past Henry to ask about my classes. She listened like the room didn't deserve her attention more than I did. "You'll have to show us your prototypes," she said, and Henry added, "I still draw on napkins." "I do too," I said, "but my professor calls them low fidelity and grades accordingly." A cousin with a perfect jaw asked, "You work, where was it?" And when I said at a cafe, his smile lifted at the edges. "How quaint," he said, as if the word were a coaster he put under me. "Quaint keeps the city awake," I said. Marina's smile was perfume. "Evan says you design the internet." "Pieces of it," I said, "paths people take when they don't know what they want yet." "Ah," she said, "I prefer paths I can see." Soup arrived in bowls thin as breath. I waited for someone else to touch a spoon first. Across from me, Grant did not look down to eat. He watched like meetings made him hungry. So, he said, voice casual as a locked door. MS, Hart, you pour coffee and arrange screens. Among other things, where did you study? I'm finishing a degree nights. Discovering higher learning later in life can be charming, he said as if I were a hobby. Evan set his spoon down. Dad, Grant didn't look at him. I'm making conversation. To me, and your family, what does your father do? Left when I was little, I said, taking a calm I did not own. My mother works retail, she worked whatever was hiring. A tradition of service, he said. We do value tradition. Elena clicked her tongue, quiet thunder. We value work in all directions. The second course was a fish that stared up at its own price point. A guest on my left told a long story about a summer in Antibes, turning the name into a vowel I couldn't afford. Someone asked if I'd ever been to Europe. Not yet. I said, travel is so educational. A woman across the flowers said, and I tried not to ask for whose education. By the time the beef arrived, rosy and precise, I could feel the effort of being welcome. Evan leaned over as the server poured more wine. Tell me what you're thinking, he said under the noise. That every fork is a test, I said, and he smiled like a secret. I reached for my glass and misjudged the distance by a breath. Red bled onto linen in a crescent moon. I started, but a server was already there with a napkin and a miracle. No harm done, Evan said, fingers warm at my wrist. Grant's chuckle carried like a toast. Careful, he said, loud enough for the marble. That bottle costs more than she makes in a week. The room tightened. Conversations forgot their verbs. My face heated in that specific shame that belongs to children and women who know the math of groceries. Evan's voice went low. That's enough. Grant lifted his glass. It's a statement of fact. He turned back to me and something in his gaze shed its manners. Tell me, MS, Hart, he said. Is that dress from this season? I don't recognize it in my wife's wardrobe. My hand found the seam at my hip. It belongs to a friend, I said. She wanted me to feel brave. Borrowed finery, he said, savoring the syllables like a course. Yes, I thought so. The table breathed in and didn't let the breath out. Marina studied the rim of her glass. Someone coughed into a napkin. Eleanor's hand found Henry's knuckles and stayed there. Father, Evan said, starting to rise. Grant flicked 2 fingers the way you do at flies. Sit, if she's to be around us, she should develop thicker skin. My skin is just fine, I said, though mine felt suddenly 2 sizes too small. It had to be. He leaned forward, not loud now, but clear. Let me be plain so there's no confusion later. My son enjoys projects. You are a project. Street garbage in a borrowed dress will never belong at this table. I heard it the way you hear a diagnosis. You know it's a lie about your body, but it still rearranges your blood. I felt the room's gaze move over me like a scanner. In the corner of my eye, a chandelier kept its nerve. I took the smallest sip of water because my hands wanted to shake and I refused to let them. A lifetime of making change without counting machines, of I can take another shift, of mom saying, we don't apologize for surviving, lined up shoulder to shoulder inside me. Street garbage, I repeated, tasting the words like I was saving them for evidence. Interesting choice. Grant raised an eyebrow as if I'd finally learned the script. I looked at Eleanor and Henry, at the server who had rescued the tablecloth, at Evan whose jaw had a new shape, then back at the man who believed wealth notarized truth. Thank you, I said, voice steady enough to hold the silver. You just made my decision remarkably easy. Chairs creaked. A fork clinked. Evan whispered, Maya, what decision? And I stood, smoothing emerald silk that was mine because someone loved me enough to loan it, and because I had decided to wear it like armor. The room waited for me to fold. I stayed standing. You want plain language, I said to Grant. Here it is. I've had a question looping in my head for months. If telling the truth burns down the room I'm sitting in, do I do it anyway? Marina set her glass down with a sound like a tiny verdict. Is this who you are, MS Hart? A performance. Not a performance, I said. A disclosure. Evan rose halfway, the chair legs whispering the floor. Maya. I didn't look at him yet. I looked at the people who'd been pretending not to watch. At the server whose knuckles had gone white around a silver jug. At Eleanor, whose eyes were the only warm center in a refrigerator of a room. I work mornings at a cafe, I said, and nights finishing a design degree. In between, I've been fact-checking and reporting part-time for the Boston Sentinel. A ripple traveled the table like wind lifting linen. 4 months before I met Evan, I was assigned to help verify a series about emissions, diesel fleets reporting numbers that were fairy tales. Be careful, Marina said, voice soft with steel. I am, I said. We found tankers topping off in international waters, then cooking the logs before hitting stateside. We found payments to service vendors that didn't have offices, just P.O. boxes and a cousin's apartment. We found manifest edits that only happen when someone thinks the ocean is a trash can. Grant's face didn't move, but the room did, people shifting in chairs, the undercurrent static of discomfort. He steepled fingers. And you believe? I don't believe I checked, I said. Then I met your son at a coffee counter and realized his last name wasn't put there for show. Evans' Maya came out like a bruise. I told my editor the day I knew, I continued. I recused, the lawyers redlined my access. The team kept going without me. We've been sitting on publication for more corroboration. I asked them to hold because I didn't want to wreck a good man along with a bad system if we were wrong. Grant laughed, finally, a single clean note. Adorable, a girl with a borrowed dress and a borrowed press pass threatening a company that employs 18,000 people. Eleanor flinched. Henry did not. I reached for my clutch with hands that looked steadier than the rest of me felt. Inside, my phone lit my palm. In the glass, I saw a chandelier fractal into a dozen versions of itself. I opened a message thread labeled Sentinel. Metro. This is so needless, Marina murmured, almost to herself. You're angry, you feel small, you want to make someone else smaller. I don't want smaller, I said. I want accountable. Accountable to who? Grant asked. To a paper that sells fear, to a public that needs villains. Evan had stood now fully and his voice didn't shake. Enough, Dad. Grant looked past him like he was fog. You think this is new? Do you imagine MS, heart? That supply chains run on feelings. That regulators understand the math of getting winter goods into a country that expects Christmas perfectly curated. Evan leaned toward him. The regs exist because rivers don't curate themselves. And you suddenly care about rivers, Grant said, turning that septic charm on his son. Because a barista with a byline told you to. That barista is the reason your board isn't suffocating in ignorance, Eleanor snapped, startling the room into silence. If what she says is untrue, you'll have your day to show it. If it is true, God help us all. Grant's jaw ticked. No one asked you. Everyone raised you, she said. My phone waited with the indifferent patience of machines. My thumb hovered. I thought of Mom at our kitchen table, balancing numbers that didn't want to be friends. I thought of a kid in a shoreline town whose inhaler lived in a backpack year-round. I thought of how good Evan had been, how careful, how he had tried to scaffold this night so I wouldn't fall through it. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to cage you between blood and truth, I said to him without looking up. That was cowardly, I'm done being that. He stepped closer. Look at me. I did. In his face there were three emotions running a race. Hurt that I had hidden, pride that I was standing, fear of what happened next. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't help me do it. He just existed there like a bridge I might still cross later if the fire spared us. I typed, withdrawing hold. Publish at midnight. You have my full statement on recusal. M. I stared at the blue box for one beat longer than a person should, then I hit send. The whoosh was microscopic and sounded like certainty. Grant reached for his napkin and folded it with surgical care. You've made a very expensive mistake, he said, and no one at this table will remember your name by next spring. Then it won't matter what I just did, I said. Marina stood so fast her chair nicked the rug. Security will escort you out. No, Eleanor said. I will. Evan moved to my side, but I held up a palm. Stay, I told him, and his eyes flashed something like pain and something like relief. You need to know what your family chooses when no one is clapping. Marina laughed a laugh she'd paid good money to practice. We choose family. That's the problem, I said. You mistake proximity for loyalty and loyalty for virtue. On my way past Grant, I set my hand on the back of my chair for balance and felt its polished spine. He spoke without looking up. For what it's worth, he said, I understand your angle. You want to be David's, but stones were made for slings, the rest of us were made to build. We all build, I said. Some of us just don't pour the foundation into the ocean. At the doorway, the server with the silver jug met my eyes. His hand was shaking, steadied the pitcher by pressing his wrist to his rib cage, then exhaled and it stopped. Small, human, precise. I nodded at him as if we were part of the same machinery. In the foyer, the quartet was packing their instruments into velvet, and my reflection in the hall mirror looked like someone I hadn't met yet, steadier, maybe, or simply done. Eleanor caught up, her palm cool on my forearm. My dear, she said, low. He'll tell himself you ruined us. Don't wear that. I can't promise not to, but I'll try, I said. I'm sorry about your celebration. Celebrations are for the living, she said. Sometimes you have to kill a myth to keep a life. The front doors opened to a night colder than my apartment and brighter than I'd hoped. The valet hurried, then hesitated. The wind found my bare shoulders. I didn't shiver. My phone vibrated in my hand. Sentinel, Metro, copy chief says, page is locked. Web holds till 12:00:00. You sure? I typed, I'm sure. Before I could hit send, another vibration, another banner. Unknown, don't leave, we need to talk, it's about the ledger you missed. The car pulled up with my coat. Behind the glass, the chandelier flickered once, or maybe I did. The text glowed on my screen like a fuse. Unknown, don't leave, we need to talk, it's about the ledger you missed. I typed, who is this? What ledger? The 3 dots appeared, vanished, didn't return. By the time the car dropped me at my building, my hands remembered the door code before my brain did. In the mirror over the sink, I looked like someone who'd borrowed a life and paid full price. I hung the emerald dress on the shower rod like a testimony, washed my face until the rich people's smell was gone, and opened my laptop. Sentinel, Metro pinged again, pages locked. Web at 12:00:00. At 11:59:57, a blue progress bar held its breath. At 12:00, it exhaled. Headline, subheads, bylines, 2 senior reporters and contributing. M. Hart recused. Photos I'd seen through a chain link of permissions. A tanker where the air tasted like pennies. Manifest with numbers that smiled too much. Invoices signed by a hand that couldn't decide if it was important or afraid. The first comments were the usual split atom of the internet. This can't be true / this has always been true. Then the story crawled to national homepages, then to push alerts, then to a woman on midnight radio saying the word Calder like it had always meant weather. I texted Mom, going to be on the news in a bad way, I'm okay. She replied with a prayer hands emoji she doesn't know how to use and proud of you even when I don't sleep. At 3 a.m., Unknown sent a second message, check the charitable schedules. Oaktide doesn't give, it launders. Think Marina slips, not opera galas. Then the number went dark. I screenshotted it, emailed it to my editor with the subject tip. And he replied, forwarding to legal. Sleep, I didn't. Morning came loud. Local TV set up outside Calder headquarters like weather had chosen to camp there. A push alert said Calder holdings down 12% per market, by noon down 20. Another alert, EPA and DOJ announced preliminary inquiries, bureaucratic for we're coming. My phone rang all day with numbers that started with +1 and ended with people who wanted to put makeup on me and a microphone under my chin. I said no to all of them. I said yes to the email that said we'd like you full-time with health insurance that made my heart hiccup. When I signed the offer, my hands shook so hard I had to brace my wrist on the desk. I waited for Evan to light my screen. He didn't. I waited anyway. At the cafe, my manager, Denise, pulled me into the back and cut straight through. You okay? I'm the kind of okay that knows what it costs, I said. You can take time. I need normal. She squeezed my shoulder. Normal is medium roast and exact change. We can do that. Regulars pretended not to recognize me, then did the dance of deciding whether to be kind. A woman in scrubs left an extra $1 in the jar like that would fix oceans. A man in a tie said nothing and avoided eye contact as if truth were contagious. At 11, Liv rushed in with a halo of hairpins and her face lit with adrenaline and fear. You didn't answer my texts, she said, then hugged me so hard the air went funny. I watched the midnight drop like it was fireworks. Are you? I don't know what I am. She looked past me at the TV in the corner where a Chiron boiled down my life into 6 words. Rafe's being weird, she said low. He asked how much your loans are. I told him to choke. Why would he? She didn't finish because my phone buzzed with a notification from an account I didn't follow. At Back Bay Rumor, barista Bates billionaire, debt, dress, and a convenient byline. The thumbnail was a zoomed-in clip of me in the emerald dress, grainy and hungry. Rafe, I said. Already yelled at him, Liv said, eyes wet. He said people should know who's clout chasing. I told him to move out. He packed a duffel, then sat on it like a toddler and asked where he should go. Somewhere without Wi-Fi, I said, but my voice shook. Denise turned up the TV because the crawl said breaking. A DOJ spokesperson in a courthouse vestibule said words that meant doors would be knocked on and drawers opened. An anchor used scheme once, pattern twice, and Calder 7 times in a minute. Somewhere traders stared at a line that only knew how to go down. I took my break outside because air tasted better with winter in it. The city moved around me, bus brakes, a bark, a laugh that belonged to a stranger. I sat on the stacked milk crates and watched my breath leave and come back like it had a choice. My mom called. I saw the lady in the red jacket, she said, the anchor. She used your name with respect. I'm afraid, I admitted. You were afraid when you got on the school bus the first time, she said. You still got on. Inside, a man in a navy coat hovered at the end of the counter, reading the menu like it held scripture. He wore the kind of suit that made everybody else's look borrowed. Denise caught my eye and nodded toward him. He's been waiting for you. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked over like the floor belonged to me. The man raised his gaze from the pastry case to my face. No photo had prepared me for the density of his presence in a room with mismatched chairs. MS. Heart, he said. His voice remembered marble. Grant Calder. The cafe stilled itself without meaning to. Cups paused midair. Liv froze with scissors still in her pocket from rushing over. Somewhere the espresso machine exhaled a sigh that sounded like a warning. What can I get you? I asked, because muscle memory can be brave when brains aren't. He glanced at the menu and then back at me as if nothing on earth could quench anything he felt. A word, he said, in private. Faye held its breath like foam on a latte. Denise took one step forward, chin up. If you're here to make trouble for my staff, it's all right, I told her, even though nothing was. I'll take my break. Grant followed me past the pastry case to the corner booth where teenagers usually studied for tests they'd already passed. The vinyl seat squeaked. Expensive men look smaller in cheap light. What can I get you? I asked, because muscle memory is dignity. He didn't sit. He placed his palms on the table like he needed a surface to press the world into. You've done something theatrical, MS. Heart, I'm here to offer you a return to proportion. That sounds like a euphemism for shut up. A settlement, he said. Non-disclosure, a position at one of our media properties at triple your current pay. We'll call it talent acquisition. The article will be challenged, diluted, then forgotten. Name your price. Accountability isn't for sale. He finally sat, as if the chair had won. Spare me the sermon. You think you've saved a coastline with your recital of invoices. What you've done is spook markets and put hundreds of hourly workers in jeopardy. You did that, I said, steady because anger steadies, when you decided regulations were suggestions. He studied me the way someone studies a language they plan never to learn. Do you know how many mouths this company feeds? Do you know what happens when panic replaces reason? Reason would have kept waste out of protected water. Stupid waste, he said softly, almost to himself, like quoting an old argument. Then he caught himself sharpened. You overestimate your importance. You're a supporting character who thinks she's the plot. That's one way to say thank you for pointing out the arson while I was holding the match. A muscle flickered in his jaw. He slid a slim envelope across the table. Money has a weight even before you count it. Take this, he said. Take the job. We'll craft a narrative where you did what you could and now you're joining a larger solution. I already have a job, I said. It's called telling the truth. You have a byline, he corrected. A temporary address. I'm offering you an institution. Is that what you call a deal that muzzles me? I call it adulthood. I didn't touch the envelope. There's something else, I said, watching his eyes instead of my courage. A ledger I might have missed. He blinked a microsecond, a hairline fracture. If your team had anything left, they'd have printed it. Maybe, or maybe some things prefer daylight to timing. I kept my face a room with no windows. I did not say the word Oaktide. I let silence see if it recognized itself. He leaned back. You don't know as much as you think. It was almost tender, almost pity. You're playing at a table where the antes are not feelings. Feelings are the only reason any of this matters, I said. Ask the people who live downstream. He placed the envelope nearer my hand like a dare. I underestimated you at dinner, he said. I won't again, but you should understand what comes next. The board has to cauterize. People will be cut. The press will tire. Your friends will too. Threats are just predictions in bad suits, I said, and reached into my apron for the envelope, not to keep, but to hand back. Denise appeared at the edge of my vision, arms folded, a one-woman security detail in a flour-dusted apron. Mr. Calder, she said level, you're done. He stood, smoothing a cuff that didn't need smoothing. Last chance, he said, softer than before. No one will remember you by spring. Your mother might appreciate a year without bills. My mother taught me we don't sell our names to buy quiet, I said. He looked at me the way people look at windows that won't open. You'll wish you'd met me 10 years from now, he said, when you've learned that ideals exhaust. Then he left, the bell over the door ringing like a small, ridiculous church. I exhaled and didn't realize till then that I'd been holding someone else's breath. Denise touched my elbow. Back room, she said. I nodded, set the untouched envelope on the counter between us, and pushed it away with one finger like it was live wire. My phone buzzed, unknown again. You made him come to you. Brave. Check filings for a donor-advised fund that isn't. Start with O. I typed back, who are you? Silence. By late afternoon, the rumor account had layered on a second post with old photos from my class portfolio and a caption that made my scholarship sound like a scam. I recognized the angle. Make the woman small, make the system large. Liv texted SOS and then nothing. When she finally called, wind scoured the line. Don't be mad, she said. At you, never. I got a DM from someone who works for your boyfriend's mom. The word boyfriend did a backflip and landed on its knees. They said they just wanted background, context. I met her fixer in a hotel lounge that smelled like lemon and lying. He offered, she stopped. I'm walking out now. How much? The question tasted like tin. It's in an envelope, she said. I didn't count, I didn't say yes, I just didn't say no fast enough. Where are you? Copley, she said, with the flowers everywhere like they're trying to distract you. In the background, I heard the hush of carpet and the clink of a glass someone couldn't afford. You don't owe them anything, I said. You don't owe me this kind of loyalty either, but you don't owe them anything. I know, she whispered. He said it was for setting the record straight. He used your loans like a crowbar. I pressed my thumb to the corner of the counter until the pain made sense again. Come here, I said. We'll cut the envelope open and feed it to the espresso grinder. She laughed, a wet, brave sound. I'm on my way. The line clicked dead. I watched the door like it could produce her if I wished hard enough. Outside, a delivery truck blocked the bus lane and a city bus still tried. Inside, the TV replayed a clip of a DOJ press conference. An anchor's lipstick didn't move when she said indictments. The bell finally rang. Liv stepped in, wind-pinked and wide-eyed, clutching her purse like a life jacket. She set it on the table between us and slid the envelope out. It was heavier than its size. Money has a sound, too quiet as apology. She stared at it, then at me, then back at it. Take it, she said, pushing it toward me as if it burned her fingers. Tell me I'm not that girl. You're not, I said, but I didn't touch it. You already proved it when you brought it here. She bit her lip, thumb worrying a crease into the paper. For a second, I thought she'd rip it in half right there. Instead, she slipped it back into her bag like a dangerous animal you return to the carrier. Tomorrow, she said, voice shaking into steel. I'll take it back to them and tell them I'm not for rent. She lifted the purse from the table. The zipper stuttered and closed. The room shrank around the decision that wasn't quite made. My phone lit with a new message from unknown, just an address at the waterfront, and Liv's hand froze on the strap. I'm taking it back, she repeated, but softer now, as if persuading herself. Then she hesitated. He knocked like someone who wasn't sure I'd open. When I did, Evan stood there with 3 days of stubble and a hotel on his clothes. Hi, he said. Hi. The word had more meanings than air. We didn't touch. We just migrated to the couch like we were old furniture and the room knew where to put us. Outside, the radiator argued with February. Inside, my laptop still showed the headline that had detonated the day. I should have called, he said. I should have told you months ago. He nodded like we were exchanging receipts for damage. I spent the last 48 hours in conference rooms that smell like arguments. I looked at files I wasn't supposed to see. He looked up. It's bad, Maya, not bad like a rounding error, bad like doctrine. Say the part you're afraid to say. He swallowed. We ghosted emissions. We laundered waste through shells, and there's a thing that isn't on any board agenda. He rubbed his temples. Oaktide Capital, it looks like a donor-advised fund. It moves like a pressure washer. Money in, clean story out. It owns a condo on the waterfront. The billing name is a woman I don't know. A mistress, I said, and hated my voice for being right. I don't know, he repeated, which meant probably. I pulled only what I could without getting tackled. The logs show transfers authorized by initials, GC for grant, legal countersigns, and sometimes MC, Marina. The name softened nothing. He stared at the threadbare rug like it might be a map. I resigned this morning, he said. Handed in my badge. The general counsel asked me if I'd like to cool off and think about my future. I said I'd rather have one. I let out a breath that had waited 2 years for someone else to say the thing. Your father will call it betrayal. He can call it whether. He looked at me then finally. I'm angry you didn't trust me with the story. I get why, but I'm still angry. Me too, I said, at me. We were quiet the way hospitals are on purpose to keep something alive. A knock tore the moment in half. Liv slid in without waiting, hair wet from the kind of winter that slaps. She put her purse on the table like it was evidence. Tell me you've got whiskey, she said, then saw Evan and stopped. Oh, hi, boyfriend in a crisis. Hi, hairstylist in a storm, he said, exhausted politeness somehow still intact. She took out an envelope the color of rich people's lies. I met your mother's fixer, she told me, eyes on the paper. He said he wanted context. He brought lemon water and a checkbook. How much? I asked, hating the tin taste of the question. I didn't count, she said, throat working. I took it because my hands forgot I'm proud, then I brought it here because my brain remembered. She pushed the envelope toward me, then yanked it back, then pushed it again. Tell me I'm not for rent. You aren't, I said. If you were, you'd have deposited it before the elevator hit the lobby. I thought about it, she said, for exactly 1 floor. Evan leaned forward. They'll use you if you let them, don't let them. She shot him a look sharp enough to shave. I'm getting lectured by a Calder about not letting rich people use me, that's adorable. He took it on the chin. Fair. I pulled a legal pad from under the coffee table. We log everything, I said. Who approached when what they said, we return it with a witness and a receipt. Like we're the ones with manners, Liv muttered, but she nodded. My phone buzzed with a number that had learned how to be anonymous. Unknown, nice job turning down the envelope. Oaktide's mailbox is under another name. Check the marina slips. A second ping, a dropped pin on the harbor, labeled Pier 7, Locker 12B. Evan read over my shoulder. This is either help or a trap. Most help is a trap, Liv said. We go anyway together. I looked at the clock. Not tonight. My body had quit 2 hours ago and just hadn't told me. Tomorrow, in daylight with boring shoes. The apartment's quiet had just begun to feel like something I could wear when my inbox barked 3 times in a row. Subject, notice and demand to preserve evidence/potential litigation. Sender, Sloan and Ware LLP, Marina's firm if you read society pages against your will. I clicked. MS. Heart, it began, courteous like a blade. Our client, Mrs. Marina Calder, demands immediate preservation of all communications, devices, and records relating to your willful defamation, tortious interference, and unlawful disclosure of confidential information. Further, we attach evidence of your bad faith motive and collusion. Attachments bloomed, a zoomed still of me in the emerald dress, a cropped screenshot of my midnight text to my editor, time-stamped and captioned per planned social media stunt, a PDF of my overdue loan notice, red-stamped and enlarged, a rumor post tile alleging I'd baited Evan for access, and worst, a partial image of a signature block, M, clipped so you could imagine a heart if you wanted. Selective screenshots, Evan said, disgusted. Classic. I scrolled. Cease and desist from further statements or publications concerning the Calder family within 24 hours. Publish a retraction acknowledging your conflict and prejudice. Accept the enclosed settlement and confidentiality terms, or we will seek immediate injunctive relief and damages. They're saying you and I colluded, I said. That I used you to get to your father. You didn't even know my last name the first month, he said, voice tight. Seen the newsroom memo where you disclosed and recused. Liv jabbed a finger at the screen. They're going to drown you in paperwork and language until you forget what words mean. Then we keep our own words, I said, though my stomach had turned into a hollow instrument. We call my editor, we send him the letter, we let the lawyers do their job. Evan's phone vibrated on the table. He didn't move. It vibrated again and then again, a hive of urgency. Finally, he flipped it over. A message from compliance, you accessed restricted files without authorization. Return your company laptop and phone at once. Your equity is frozen pending board review. He closed his eyes. There it is. I'm sorry, I said. He opened them again, and for a second I saw the boy, not the air. Don't be, I should have pulled the plug a long time ago. We sat with the letter like it was a fourth person in the room. The radiator stopped complaining. The street breathed. Somewhere a siren admitted what it was. Liv stood, paced 3 steps, stopped. We returned the envelope at 10 a.m. with Denise as a witness, she said, project managing her way out of shame. Then we go to the pier and see if the mysterious benefactor left us a swear jar. I laughed, an unsteady thing. Deal. Evan rose, slipping his coat on like a promise to be less cold. I'm checking into a different hotel, he said, somewhere my family doesn't own. Tomorrow I'll meet you both at the cafe, we'll return the money, then we'll go to the marina. He hesitated at the door. Maya. Yeah, if this letter scares you, and it should, don't let it rewrite who you are. He looked at Liv, or who you are. Liv saluted with 2 fingers. I'm still me, I just forgot for a minute. After they left, the apartment felt like the space after a joke where no one laughed. I forwarded the demand letter to my editor with the subject, here we go, added the rumor screenshots, the Oaktide pin. He replied in 3 minutes, do not delete anything. Our counsel will respond. You did right. Sleep, I tried. The ceiling replayed the dinner like it wanted to win this time. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed again, unknown, if you don't like lawyers, you're going to hate auditors. Bring quarters for the locker and gloves. I typed, who are you, why help me? The dots appeared, disappeared, returned. Let's say I'm tired of buying bleach. A beat later, a final image arrived. A key fob on someone's palm. Silver tag stamped 12B over a blue background I recognized even in low light, the painted hull of a Calder yacht. At 9:58 a.m., Denise marched into the hotel lounge like a union. Liv and I flanked her. The fixer from last night waited with lemon water and a smile that had passed inspection 1,000 times. We're returning this, Denise said, setting the envelope down as if it were contaminated. You'll provide a receipt. Of course, he purred. Just to be clear, this was a goodwill gesture for setting the record straight. The record stands, I said. You don't get to buy punctuation. He slid a typed acknowledgement across the table and clicked his pen. Liv watched his hands like she was learning a new species. When he reached for the envelope, she kept it for a beat. You almost made me forget who I am, she said. Don't try that again. Outside, winter slapped our cheeks awake. Liv looped her arm through mine and exhaled a laugh that belonged to a girl who just kept something precious. Coffee, she announced. Then you me boring shoes the pier. After interviews, I said, I pitched the series they bit. The newsroom gave me a small desk that smelled like other people's deadlines and a binder labeled Impact. I built a list: depot closures, crews laid off mid-shift, shoreline towns where kids' inhalers clicked like metronomes. By noon, we were on the road. First stop, a trucker named Lewis who'd logged 30 years and 1,000,000 miles. He poured us coffee in a kitchen that remembered birthdays with magnets. I did my part, he said, showing me hands that had been a job. Then I watched the stock eat my pension like a snack. I'm sorry, I said. He shrugged. I don't want sorry, I want a path. Second, a single mom named Cherie whose badge still dangled from her rearview like a relic. They said temporary shutdown, she told me, smoothing a paper napkin into tissue. My temporary's now 3 weeks. The rent's not temporary. Third, a coastal biologist in a lab where glass cores rose like gray candles. She sliced one open, and the layers told a story that didn't care whether we believed. See the dark band, she said. That's after they started reporting different numbers. Water remembers. I took notes until the pen stuttered. Between stops, I called Evan. I'm setting up a fund, he said, voice clipped with purpose. Not PR, real repairs. Cleanups with wages decent enough to matter. Hiring displaced folks first. You'll get called a traitor from both sides, I said. That means it's working, he answered. I talked to 3 foremen already. They don't want to be symbols, they want jobs. Back in the city, the first piece went live with photos of hands and marsh cores and a headline that did not thirst for blood. Comments flooded in, donations, job leads, fury that had learned to be useful. Someone pledged masks for kids at the elementary school by the river. Then the counter-current hit. At Back Bay, rumor pushed a new tile. Barris debate. Her human cost is her own, over a clip of me in the emerald dress and a screenshot of my overdue loan. An influencer with 1 million followers duetted, head tilted, concern weaponized. Ladies, watch the pattern, she said. Pretty girls who want headlines find princes who have them. Liv texted a row of fire emojis she'd sworn off and then, say the word and I'll go nuclear in her comments. Don't, I typed. They want a food fight. We're feeding a city. The fun site Evan spun up in a single, sleepless afternoon pinged my phone with micro-donations that read like prayers. For Lewis, for Cherie, for kids who wheeze. He forwarded me the spreadsheet, names I didn't know, dollars that added up in a way stories rarely do. At 5, Denise pulled me into the cafe back room where the walls learned gossip faster than people. You're trending, she said. Not the good kind. On the small TV, the influencer's reel looped. My dress, my face, a freeze frame of Evan's profile at some ribbon cutting, a caption, she played him. Comments scrolled like a chorus auditioning for cruelty. Someone found my undergrad dorm photo and circled a boy's arm around my shoulder. Someone else posted the property records for mom's apartment as if bricks were shame. My lungs forgot the choreography. I sat down on an upturned milk crate and counted the beats like I'd been taught in therapy I couldn't afford. In 4, hold 4, out 6. Somewhere in the front, a customer knocked a spoon against a mug. The sound was ordinary and it saved me. Look at me, Denise said, steadying my shoulders. This is noise, you do signal. I nodded, but my body hadn't yet received the memo. The phone buzzed again. My editor, piece is strong. We're green-lighting the series. Also, legal wants the lemma on that donor fund. Oaktide, tomorrow, I wrote. We're going to the marina. Evan called. You good? Define, I said. I'll take the comments so you don't have to, he said. I've got broad shoulders and an account people like to yell at. Don't, I said. The story's not us. He was quiet then. It is to them. He exhaled. I just got off a call with the old warehouse manager from Quincy, he cried. Said he hasn't been asked a real question by anyone with a tie in 10 years. Then ask another, I said. At dusk, I wrote till my hands cramped and scheduled the next profile for 6 a.m. A custodian who'd worked nights at a terminal no one will say out loud anymore. I closed the laptop and let the room be small and mine. That was when at Back Bay Rumor dropped a second post. A voice memo icon floated over my face like bait. I pressed play. My own voice filled the room, plucked from some forgotten voicemail. I'm done being cowardly, I said. I'll hit send. The caption did the rest, confession, preplanned. It was out of context and perfectly shaped for fury. Liv burst through the back door, breathless. Don't look at your phone, she said, too late, already pulling me into a hug that left powder on my sleeve. We ride it out. We keep doing the work. We go to the pier in the morning and see if the ocean left us a breadcrumb. I nodded again because nodding was free. The reel replayed without my permission. Outside, a bus sighed to its stop. The sky over the river went the color of a bruise resolving. My phone buzzed one more time. A new account, no avatar, 3 words. Midnight, Pier 7. The text was a dare. Midnight, Pier 7. Liv showed up in a hoodie, hair stuffed in a beanie like a secret. Evan wore the coat of a man who just resigned from a dynasty. The harbor had the kind of cold that edits your bones. Locker 12B took 2 quarters and a prayer. I pulled on the gloves the tipster suggested and turned the key. Inside, a flash drive taped to a manila folder, a crumpled marina slip stamped Oaktide Capital, and a Polaroid of a woman laughing on a deck I recognized from gala photos, a Calder yacht. Red lipstick had kissed the corner of the Polaroid. On the back, in a clean, slanted hand, "Layla, don't waste my time." "Who is she?" Liv whispered. "The woman the condo belongs to," Evan said, throat tight. "I've never met her." Someone coughed 2 docks over. A gull argued with the wind, left with the folder under my coat and the drive in a pocket like a heartbeat. Halfway to the car, Evan's phone buzzed. He stared at the screen, jaw clenching. "My mother," he said and answered. Marina didn't bother with hello. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Stop pretending," he said. "You've humiliated us." "We humiliated ourselves," he answered. "You signed some of it." Silence like ice. "Then, I signed what kept this family from falling apart. You built a facade and called it a house." She exhaled. "Come home, let us fix this the right way." "The right way," he said, "isn't ours to define anymore." He hung up. His hands were shaking and he didn't hide them. We scanned the folder at the newsroom the next morning, ledger pages that looked like they'd been angry for a long time, Oaktide moving money to an LLC that paid a Harborview Residence's mortgage, disbursements labeled slip fees and marine services, amounts rounded like people who weren't worried about decimals. The drive held photos, Grant on a dock with a man in an inspector's jacket, the laughing woman from the Polaroid passing him an envelope you could call anything you wanted. A number was scribbled on the inside flap. I texted, "We saw what you left, talk." The reply arrived before my doubt did. Langford Hotel, bar. 5 p.m. Come pretty, come honest. We sat in velvet that had never been tired. She arrived on the 5 like a promise. Black dress, high cheekbones, walk that new rooms. Her perfume smelled like someone else's decision. "Layla," she said, sliding into the banquette across from us as if we'd been the ones invited. I expected taller or angrier. "Depends on the day," I said. "Thanks for the locker." "I needed you to know I can help," she said, ordering a drink with a nod the bartender understood. "I also needed you to know the cost." "What do you want?" Evan asked, besides to watch him burn. She smiled without heat. "Immunity, and 10% of your little repair fund." Liv choked on a peanut. 10 what? Layla's eyes flicked to her. "I like your hair." "Don't flirt with the help," Liv said sweetly. "It's condescending." Layla turned back to us. "I have yacht photos your paper doesn't. Ledger copies with signatures you haven't printed. I have the name of the man who cleans the logs before the auditors arrive and the burner he uses to celebrate afterward." She sipped. "In return, I want not to be a headline and I want skin in the game you're so proud of." "We can connect you with DOJ," I said. "Witness counsel, a formal proffer, but we're not buying evidence. The fund is for people who didn't choose this." Layla laughed low. "I didn't choose it either. I just learned the gravity of money earlier than you. Protection doesn't pay rent." Evan leaned in. "You're asking us to launder your reputation through a charity that exists because of the damage you watched happen." "Watched," she said, amused. "Darling, sometimes I held the towels. The part of me that rescues burned. You could help undo it." "Help," she repeated, tasting it. "Language the innocent love." She tapped her glass. "Here's what I'll do. I'll hand you a drive tonight, clean, clear, contemporaneous. In exchange, you say publicly I cooperated. You do your little series on human faces, and the fund hires 2 of my people to run disbursements. Paper it however makes you sleep." "No," Evan said, the word a door that shut the room. "We won't launder you or your friends through this. If you want out, walk into the U.S. Attorney's office and tell them everything." She considered him with a clinical kindness. "You think integrity is a currency that spends everywhere. It isn't." "For accuracy," I said, laying my phone openly on the table with the voice memo app already red-eyed. "Do you consent to me recording this?" Layla looked at the phone, then at me, mouth curving. "For your memoir? Fine." She raised her glass to it. "Hi, future readers." We asked names. She gave a few, let others dangle just out of reach. We asked who signed what. She drew circles on a cocktail napkin with a pen that probably cost more than my rent. We asked where the bodies were buried. "Not bodies," she said, bored. "Contracts. The bodies are fine." The bartender refreshed water like he knew he was witnessing something he shouldn't. Layla slid a thumb drive across the table, wrapped in a white matchbook that said Langford in gold. "This will tide you over," she said. "When you realize you need me more, call." "We'll give this to counsel," I said. "Of course you will," she said, "the way a cat says of course you'll feed me." She stood, smoothed her dress, and set down a tip that could have paid someone's light bill for a month. One other thing, she added, leaning in close enough for her perfume to sign my skin. You're not the only ones I talk to. After she left, we breathed like divers breaking the surface. Evan reached for the drive. I stopped his hand with mine. Chain of custody, I said. We're not throwing away the case because we couldn't resist peeking. We walked it to the newsroom like it weighed more than the harbor. Legal bagged it, copied it, ghosted it onto machines that aren't real until you need them. My editor stood with his arms folded the way dads fold their arms when the car has a new dent. You sure about your source? He asked. I'm sure she's dangerous, I said. Sometimes that's the same thing. I filed notes. Liv doodled Layla's jawline with devil horns in the margin of my pad and then struck them out. Too easy, she said. Make it a crown. At 9, the city glowed with that tired gold that pretends to be safety. I went home and opened the window for air that didn't belong to anyone. My phone buzzed with a message from unknown. You should have asked what she wants from the other side. What does she want? I typed. The dots danced. To live indoors, to be loved, to be untouchable. Same as the rest of us. An hour later, my editor called, voice clipped. We scanned the drive. Hashes don't match the copies we got from whistleblowers. Some pages are true, some are, he sighed. Curated. She fed us a part refutation, I said, stomach going cold. So she can tell another story somewhere else. Somewhere else just published a statement, he said. From Calder's Legal, exculpatory ledgers show charitable disbursements, not slush. We condemn doctored files circulated by bad actors, including a barista-turned-blogger. They attached pages that look a lot like what you handed me, except different in the right places. My phone lit again, this time with a photo on a society account. Layla on a townhouse stoop, pressing the bell I knew had a camera, wearing the same black dress. The caption, visitor at the Calders, late call. The comments were a chorus of knives. Liv texted, she flipped. Evan called, are you home? Lock your door. In the glow of my laptop, the Polaroid Layla had left on the dock stared up at me, red lipsticked and careless. On the back, below her name, I hadn't noticed a second line in faint pencil until the light caught it. Whoever pays writes history. By morning, the city had learned a new word, grand jury. Anchors said it like a weather event. Cameras found the courthouse steps and stayed there, hungry. In the newsroom, printers coughed out subpoenas the way storm drains spit leaves. I filed the second human cost piece, Sherry and her rent, Lewis and his pension. Comments did their complicated chorus. Thank you / keep going / this is why companies leave. Between paragraphs, I answered a dozen emails from shore towns offering church basements and stale cookies for interviews. Between those, I checked my phone for Evan's name and reminded myself I didn't need it to breathe. He texted at noon, town meeting tonight. East Shore Community Center, come. The gym smelled like varnish and history. Folding chairs made a field. Someone had taped a hand-painted sign to the stage. River, not a dump. An older woman led a prayer. A teenager read a slam poem called Breathing Isn't a Luxury. When my name was introduced, I heard two kinds of clapping, grateful and suspicious. I'm not here to be congratulated, I said, palms open. I'm here to ask what repair looks like from you. A man in a Union jacket, Foreman Paul on his name patch, stood, face red from sun or anger. Repair. Lady, I got laid off Monday. Repair looks like my mortgage being due yesterday. Applause swallowed him whole. My throat tightened. You're right, I said. You didn't cause this, you're paying for it, that's wrong. I pointed to the back where Evan leaned against a cinder block wall, hands in pockets. There's a fund, not PR, built to hire for the cleanup first from those laid off. It won't fix everything. It should have existed before any of this broke, but it can be a start. Paul's jaw worked. You writing a profile on my family going hungry. If you'll have me, I said, and then I'm coming back in 6 months to ask what changed. He looked at me a long time like he was choosing the weight of a stone. Finally, 6 months, he said, and not with some camera that cuts my sentences in half. Deal, I said, and the gym exhaled like a choir finding the same note. After, people made a line that felt like confession, hands I held, stories I wrote down. Evan stayed at the edge until the crowd thinned, then joined me outside in air that tasted like wet newspaper. You were good, he said. You built something useful, I said. How many? 42 cleanup hires by Monday if we move fast, he said, eyes tired but awake. We're partnering with the conservation lab, the biologist with the marsh cores, remember her? She only remembers everything, I said. He nodded, then went quiet in that way he does before telling the truth. There was a ring, he said, almost conversational, as if discussing weather. Months ago. I bought it and put it in a drawer. I took it out 2 nights ago and put it in my pocket to remind myself not to use it. My heartbeat tripped. He watched my face as if measuring aftershocks. I'm not asking a question, he said quickly. I'm saying I'm learning patience. I want to do this right. Build a life we both recognize when the lights are off. I don't want a ring to fix what work should, I said, voice soft but certain. Me neither, he said. That's why it's still in the drawer. Back at the cafe, Denise had taped a sign to the tip jar. Don't dox small businesses, book an appointment instead. Liv's salon had been hit with a flood of one-star reviews from accounts that didn't exist last week. Clients canceled in a panic after the influencer's latest reel. I'll post, I said. You'll throw gasoline, Liv said, scooping mousse like she was armoring a knight. Ignore it and it dies. It's killing your Tuesdays, I said, gesturing at the empty afternoon slots. Denise cleared her throat. We can be quiet and strategic at the same time. She pulled out her phone. Community pop-up. Free bang trims for kids by the river, donation jar for the repair fund. No brands, no hashtags, just a sign under a tree. We did it Saturday in a park that pretended to be spring. Liv set up a mirror, I set up a clipboard. Evan lugged a folding table like he was born for manual labor. Parents came with lawn chairs and stories. Kids came with cowlicks and invented courage. A local baker dropped a tray of cookies like a white flag. Someone brought a guitar and forgot 3 chords in a row. The influencer tried to hijack it, posting a zoom of my hand touching Evan's elbow. Comments rose and fell. The sky stayed. At 4, an older man in a tie I recognized from the union meeting put $50 in the jar and said to Liv, "You did right." And I watched her stand a little taller. By Monday, EPA/DOJ consent decree trended like a sports score. The number at the bottom, civil penalties and mandated remediation, rounded to $300 million in a way that made television nod solemnly. My editor told me not to print the word victory. I told him the river hadn't yet said it, so I wouldn't. The legal letters multiplied like coat hangers. Marina's firm filed something barbed about my pattern of malice. The newsroom lawyer answered in a dialect of dagger. Layla posted a photo from Paris 3 days after threatening to be useful. The caption, interiors. The comments splintered, queen/homewrecker/teach us your ways. At 2 p.m., the cafe bell chimed and a man in a suit that had forgotten how to be kind slid a thick envelope across the counter. Service, he said. For what? Denise asked. Oaktide Capital, LLC, he said. And MS, Maya Hart. He tapped the second envelope, my name block printed in a hand that had practiced. Sign here. We did because paper has rules. The server left. Denise locked the door, flipped the sign, and poured 3 waters like shots. The subpoena crackled like storm plastic. Subpoena Deuces Techum, United States of America v. Calder Holdings, Oaktide Capital, et al. I flipped through pages that smelled like toner and consequence. Exhibits, schedules, ranges of dates that made a calendar ashamed. Then a photocopy of a single page from a bank file, Oaktide Wire Authorization, Approvals, 2 signatures. The first one I knew like a scab, Grant Calder. The second was neater, almost schoolteacher, the M blooming a little before settling down, Marina Calder. For a second the room was only ink. Liv swore under her breath so softly it felt like prayer. Denise set a hand on the counter to keep the world from slipping. My phone buzzed, unknown, told you check the slips. The ocean doesn't keep secrets forever. A second text followed, he always said he built the house. She kept the lights on. My vision narrowed to a tunnel where there was only a single name and the sound of Evan's ring in a drawer closing. I called him, he picked up on the first syllable. Hey, he said, they served Oaktide, I said. There are approvals. Silence, then, whose, I told him. The pause on the line felt like an elevator getting stuck between floors. Somewhere on his end, I heard the quiet scrape of wood. A drawer opened or shut. I'm coming, he said, voice a shape I hadn't heard on him before. Evan, I started, but the line clicked, not angry, just finished. Outside, a siren wound itself down. Inside, the page with M. Calder on it lay in the center of the counter like a small, precise explosion. Eliner's invitation arrived by hand, not courier, in her own looping script, family supper. Truth expected, not performance. I read it twice. Evan texted, you don't have to come. I typed, I do. The Calder dining room had been reset from spectacle to human scale. No quartet, no flower walls, just Eliner's blue china and Henry's stubborn candlesticks that leaned and were forgiven. The table sat 8. Only 6 chairs were filled. Henry at the head, Eliner at his right, Marina beside her, an empty seat like a warning, Evan at my side, and a space kept for Grant the way you keep a chair for a ghost you intend to argue with. He came late, as if being needed were a dress code. The room tightened when he crossed the threshold. He nodded to his parents, nodded to me as if we'd done nothing irreversible together, and took the empty chair. Eliner folded her napkin once, laid it down, and didn't bother with small talk. We're not here to rehearse manners, she said. We're here to say the parts we've avoided. Henry's voice was gravel smoothed by the ocean. I built a company so we could eat, and so other people could too. Somewhere we started feeding the wrong thing. Grant leaned back. You asked me here to be scolded. I have counsel for that. We asked you here, Eleanor said, because courtrooms tell the truth badly. Families sometimes do it worse. We can try to do it right. Marina sat very straight, hands latticed in her lap as if she were holding a fragile animal. Her lipstick had been put on with the kind of care you give to armor. Henry turned to me. Maya, say your piece. I didn't stand. I didn't make a speech. The river remembers, I said. The people do too. Grant's mouth flattened. We've already covered your crusade. What we haven't covered, Evan said, calm as a tether, is Oaktide. He looked at his father, and who signed? Marina flinched at the name like it was cold water. Grant didn't. Charitable vehicles are perfectly legal, he said. Laundering isn't, I answered. A vein in his temple registered my existence. You're still playing hero, he said, almost amused. A barista with a god complex. Eleanor's hand found Henry's knuckles and pressed once, a Morse code for restraint. She turned to Marina, voice gentle as cloth. My dear, did you sign anything you didn't understand? Marina stared at her hands. I understood enough. Enough to see a wire labeled Marine Services that paid for woman's mortgage. Evan asked. His voice didn't rise, that made it worse. Marina breathed in, out, measured. There are things you do to keep a house standing, she said. You brace a beam. You patch a roof in the rain and pray. You co-sign a loan because the bank won't call you back unless your husband's name is in the subject line. You tell yourself it's temporary. You signed approvals. Evan said, the word heavy. You knew. I knew the ledger, she said. Not the water. Her eyes found mine for the first time, and in them I saw the thing women are taught to be fluent in, salvage. I told myself the money was moving where it always moves, with men, in rooms I wasn't in. I told myself I was protecting my son from scandal and my husband from ruin. I told myself so many things I stopped hearing myself. She swallowed, and then I signed. Grant's chair scraped. You don't confess at my table to impress the help. Enough, Henry said, a sound that had once stopped forklifts. He turned his father voice on his son. Grant, I taught you that numbers matter because they stand up without friends. Somewhere you started hiring friends to hold them up. Grant's gaze slid to him, then to the candlesticks, then to the ceiling, as if integrity might be written up there in Latin. You built a thing in one era, he said quietly. I kept it alive in another. Alive isn't the same as right, Evan said. Grant's eyes landed back on him, and for once there was no performance, only something raw and irritated by air. You left, he said. You left me to clean your mess and my own while you play saint with a GoFundMe. I left, Evan said, because I refused to make your mess mine. Silence sat down with us, helped itself to the rolls. I could hear the old house breathing. Eleanor looked at Grant the way mothers do when they remember holding your fever and your first paycheck in the same hands. If you believe you're right, she said softly, then say it fully and bear the weight. If you know you're wrong, stop making the rest of us carry it. Grant's jaw worked. He glanced at Marina. She did not look back. The absence of that look told more truth than anything tonight. He pushed his chair back. Father, he said to Henry, a word. Henry stood. The two of them left the room like men going to lift something heavy. The doorway swallowed them. Eleanor's hands trembled once and then were still. Marina stared straight ahead, unblinking, the way a person does when they don't yet know if they're drowning or baptizing. Evan's knee touched mine under the table and stayed there. No speech. Just pressure. I remembered the ring in the drawer and the way he'd said he'd leave it there until work did what symbolism never could. I put my hand over his. The gesture was a sentence we hadn't earned and still believed we could someday. From the hall came low voices. Grant's clipped, Henry's iron sanded smooth. A door opened, closed, silence again. When they returned, Henry's shoulders were lower. Grant looked like a man who'd been told a thing he could not out-argue. Henry sat. Grant didn't. He stood at the head of the table and studied the candlesticks that leaned and were forgiven. I'll take a deal, he said. The words were flat, not noble. I'll plead. No one spoke. The relief that flooded the room was not clean, it carried silt. Eleanor pressed her napkin to her mouth, eyes wet but fierce. And the river? There will be a consent decree, Grant said, almost bored. There will be money. There will be trucks with logos that make everyone feel narrated. And prison? Evan asked. Grant's gaze didn't flinch. We'll see what the math says. Marina's hands finally moved. She reached for her water and missed it by an inch. What happens to me? The question was whispered to the table, to the room, to the god of women who sign things in rooms where men don't sit. Grant didn't answer. Henry did. We get you a lawyer who works for you, he said. And we stop lying to each other. Grant's mouth curved in something that might once have been a laugh. On one condition, he said, looking at me then at Evan. The air tilted. You keep her out of it. Marina lifted her head, startled. Who's her? My wife, he said, as if the word were a clause that solved everything. You keep Marina's name out of the narrative. You write about me, I can take it. Evan stood. You don't get to bargain with truth like it's a menu. Grant's eyes sharpened. You want a confession. You want me to walk into a courtroom and put my name in the past tense. Fine. But I'm not watching you turn my wife into a headline to buy yourself virtue. Turned her into a signature, I said, too quickly, feeling Alina's look cauterize my tone. I softened. The story will say what happened, all of it. Grant's face cooled into strategy. Then there's nothing to discuss, he said and reached for his coat. Sit, Henry said, not loud, just final. Grant froze. Henry's voice gentled, sand over iron. You asked for condition, here is mine. He looked at all of us, one by one. We stopped negotiating with lies. Grant stared at him a long time. His shoulders dropped a fraction. He took his hand off the coat. Alina picked up the candlesticks and straightened them as if such things could be corrected by hand. We will make amends, she said, even if it takes the rest of our lives. No one ate the pie she'd made. We sat until the candles guttered and made little ghosts. On the way out in the foyer where this had once all been glitter, Marina touched my sleeve. I am not innocent, she said, voice thin, honest, but I am not his alibi either. I know, I said. Outside, the night was an argument we couldn't win, only outlast. Evan and I stood on the steps where men in suits had once applauded themselves. He put his hands in his pockets and took them out again like the practice of being ordinary needed reps. He'll plead, he said, as if naming it would keep it real. He'll try to keep you from writing the parts that hurt, I said. I won't let him, he said, and in his face I saw a boy who had believed in houses and a man who was learning to live without them. My phone buzzed. Unknown, he'll trade names to save the house. Ask who he gives them. A second text arrived before I could answer. Start with the dockmaster. He was never just a dockmaster. I looked back at the door we'd just left. In the glass I could see us, smaller than we felt, larger than we used to be. Somewhere upstairs, a drawer slid shut. Sentencing sat on the calendar like a storm with a name. Grant's plea hearing packed a courtroom that smelled like old wood and new cameras. He said guilty, as if the syllables were a currency he could still control. Outside, microphones asked if he was sorry. He said he was committed to repair. The river didn't answer. Marina hired her own counsel. She started attending a Tuesday group on the 3rd floor of a church that loaned its rooms to whoever needed them. Newly sober truckers, widows, women who'd sign things. Liv and I met her there once by accident. She nodded like a person learning a new language and kept walking. Evans Fund hired its first cohort, 42 names that looked like a proof of life. The conservation lab trained them to read a shoreline the way you read a patient. Work boots lined the hallway like a promise. Evan came home with sand in his cuffs and a voice that had stopped asking permission to be useful. My series ran every Wednesday. Lewis and his pension, Cherie and her rent, a science teacher explaining why the marsh cores were a history book written without ink. The comments did their usual math, but tucked between the noise were sentences that sounded like people. I can help Tuesdays. There's a spare room. I'll watch kids during interviews. A small press called and said the words book deal the way people say yes at altars. I said yes back, surprised to find I meant it. The dockmaster turned out not to be just a dockmaster. We found him in a windowless office that faced the harbor in theory and a stack of gray filing cabinets in practice. His name was Cole Anders, though the contracts called him consultant in fonts that tried too hard. He'd once been a cop until a shoulder and a mayor disagreed. On his desk sat a ledger with bleach rings like moons. You're here about Oaktide, he said, not pretending otherwise. You signed intake on the slips, I said, setting my recorder plainly between us. I signed a lot of things, he said, thumb tapping the desk in a tempo I recognized from people who don't sleep through the night. Sometimes a favor is a rope. Whose? He smiled without humor. You think favors have one end? Evan kept quiet and let the room fill itself. Liv leaned against a file cabinet and looked like hairspray could be a weapon if required. Cole stared at the ledger like it might absolve him if he stared long enough. I kept the marina clean, he said, finally. Come in, boats go out. You scrub what's on the hull and what's on the books and you tell yourself both jobs pay the same. You texted me, I said. Locker, gloves, bleach. He cocked his head. I don't text reporters, I don't text anyone. My kids took my smartphone after I tried to answer it with the TV remote. Then who? I started and stopped because the question sounded bigger in the room than I'd intended. Cole slid a folder across the desk. Inside, photocopies of wire transfers that pretended to be charitable dock fees that fed a mortgage with a north-facing view, a note in a neat, schoolteacher hand. Check the slips. He always said he built the house. I kept the lights on. The M in the corner curled like a woman talking herself brave. We left with the copies in a brown envelope that felt heavier than it was. Outside, the wind came off the water and tried to rearrange our faces. Was that? Liv started. Maybe, I said, not trusting my voice. Evan didn't say anything. He looked at the horizon the way you look at a road you grew up on, familiar and knew at once. In the weeks after, Layla posted from a rooftop pool with a caption about surrender. The DOJ filed a motion that replaced poetry with math. The influencer moved on to a chef who salted his pasta water with tears. At Back Bay, rumor pivoted to a councilman's haircut. We opened the co-op on a Saturday. Liv's chairs on one side, my desk and a thrifted drafting table on the other, a corkboard in the middle that said community requests with crooked thumbtacks. Alina sent lilies that smelled like medicine and wrote a card that said, "Build small, build true." Henry came at closing with 2 paperbacks about bridges. Denise taped a hand-lettered sign in the window, "Pay what you can, take what you need." Resumes, trims, help. People came in shy and left with a plan, or at least an appointment. A boy brought a half-dead fern and asked if we did plants. Liv cut off what couldn't be saved and told him to give it light. I wrote light on my palm and underlined it. The night the plea became a sentence on paper, Evan and I walked back to the river. The wind had a softer edge, or maybe we did. He stopped where the railing rusted and took something from his pocket, then changed his mind and put it back. "There's a ring," he said. "There will be for a while." "I know," I said. "I want to ask when the asking doesn't sound like compensation," he said. "When you aren't carrying a book deadline and a city's grief and my family's evidentiary trail." "Ask when the asking sounds like a Tuesday," I said, smiling without planning to. We watched a barge move like an idea everyone shared and no one owned. He reached for my hand and I let mine be taken. My phone buzzed. "Unknown, he's giving them names. He'll trade. Watch the dockmaster." A second text landed before I could breathe. He wasn't supposed to sign that last page. She was. I looked up and saw across the street a woman in a winter coat the color of restraint. She held her phone the way a person holds a weapon they don't want to use. Marina met my eyes long enough to count to 3, then turned and walked toward the church with the Tuesday rooms. "I think I know," I said, showing Evan the screen. He read, exhaled, didn't chase. "She's trying to keep the beams from collapsing on him," he said. "She's trying to keep them from collapsing on herself," I said. We stood there until the barge disappeared into the kind of dark that doesn't frighten you anymore. Later on the couch, Evan took the ring out and set it in my palm without closing my fingers around it. "No dynasty," he said. "No condition, if and when you say." I closed my hand, not as an answer, but as a promise that I'd decide when the story stopped needing us to hold it up. In the kitchen, the fern the boy had brought sat on the windowsill, stubbornly green at the edges. The book proofs came a month later, a brick of paper that made the table dip. I wrote the dedication in a rush that surprised me. For my mother, who taught me to count the right things. For Evan, who stopped confusing silence with love. For Liv, who returned the envelope. For the river, which remembers. I mailed the pages and went to the co-op. A woman waited at the door with a resume that read "Mother" in a dozen fonts. We picked verbs that hired. On the day trucks inched down to the water with hoses and apology, Lewis texted me a photo of his first day's vest with his name sewn wrong. "Lewis," it read. He wrote, "Names still me no matter how they spell it." I put the phone to my chest and let the laugh break something tight inside me. That night, in the space between sleep and whatever keeps sleep from leaving, my phone lit the room. "Unknown again. He just gave them the dockmaster. Check the arrest log at dawn. He's buying a smaller sentence with a man who can't afford one." My stomach fell through the mattress. I typed, "Who are you?" The dots appeared and steadied. "A woman who got tired of buying bleach." I stared at the line until the light hurt. Evan rolled toward me half awake. "Another tip." "Yeah," I said, and set the phone face down. "Tomorrow." He tucked me closer with the absent-minded efficiency of someone who knows what to do with sleep and warmth. I watched the river in my head and saw its slow, exact work. Some people build empires. We chose to build a life.